Great.
Awesome.
Got it. People are coming in. Welcome, everybody. We're going to give it just another moment as we allow folks a bit of time to get signed in, get a cup of coffee, get some tea, whatever your pleasure, and
Get your liquids
for a great conversation. I'm already being educated, not so much on Gen AI yet, but also on on all other amazing things.
We even have devices coming in.
Devices.
Yeah, Hector's iPhone.
All right. I see Art from Hike 2 is coming in. We have Joanne, Julie, Debbie, Ken, Albert, Frida, John. Welcome in, everyone. We are excited for today's session. I think we're ready to get it officially kicked off. And okay, so let's do it. The main event. This is what we're here to do. I would like to officially welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Kalia Garrido, and I head up marketing and events here at Great Data Minds. If you don't know us already, Great Data Minds is a collective of passionate data activists, and we are on a mission to modernize the world of data. We do this in two different ways. The first is with our services arm at GDM Innovation Labs. This is our strategic planning, education, and the deployment of critical data projects. And then we also have a content engine, a community. We host amazing events just like the one that you're here to see today. This is at greatdataminds.com. A little bit of housekeeping before we get kicked off. This is a webinar, of course, so your cameras and microphones are off, but we welcome questions in the chat throughout the session. If you prefer to wait until the end, we will reserve a little bit of time for a more formal Q&A. But if you feel like chatting or you're inspired to share a link or something relevant, a note in the chat, absolutely do so. We saw quite a bit of activity in the chat the last time that we did an event just like this. So we hope that we'll see the same today. So some introductions as we get things kicked off. Today, we are so excited to host a hyper relevant session that is on the hottest tech topic of all, which is generative AI. So allow me to do some introductions for my esteemed guests. The first is Mukul Kishore, and he is the head of product management, generative AI, and ML and forecasting platforms at CBRE. He is driven by the potential of ethical artificial intelligence and machine learning products, and he believes transformation innovation is possible in any organization through a product-led culture built on the foundations of design thinking and lean product management. And of course, usual suspect, Mr. Mike Lampa. He's my partner in crime. He is an accomplished transformation agent with a specialty in modernizing enterprise data and analytics platforms. Mike's expertise lies in the selection and implementation of modern tech tools, platforms, and tactical migration roadmaps. He is our Chief Analytics Officer here at Great Data Minds. And Mike, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kayla. Hey, Mukul, welcome. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing great. Looking forward to the session. Very excited to be here.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Been doing this, as you can kind of tell by my physical appearance, I've been doing this for a few years, right? And over the course of almost 3 decades, I have never seen a technology disruption like we're seeing with this whole generative AI technology stack. So, and I know a lot of people are sharing that sentiment with me, and we're all scrambling to really get our arms around it. So I really appreciate you taking the time to share your expertise with us. Cool. Tell us a little bit more about you. How'd you come to where we are today, sitting across the camera from each other?
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So just on a personal level, I grew up in India, New Delhi, and I migrated to the US in early 2000s to go to grad school at Virginia Tech. And after spending a few years here on the East Coast, my wife and I moved to the West Coast for 10 years, lived in Seattle, lived in the Bay Area. Really enjoyed the cultures of working and living, in those cities. And a few years ago, came back to the Washington, D.C. area. And on a professional level, I've worked with wireless companies in the first half of my career to launch, 3G, 4G networks all over the country. But I would say in the last 10 years or so, I've focused more on the collection of companies known as FIRE. That is finance, insurance, and real estate. And I surprisingly came on that term because they're all services companies with similar, cultures and mindsets. And then within that, there was a lot of exposure to the world of digital engagement, data, and applied AI and ML throughout like the products, consumer products, and internal products. So yeah, right now, so I've been a product manager, and now I lead teams of product managers and product designers. I'd love to see so many familiar people who signed up for today's session. I think a lot of you are my colleagues from the past, friends, some clients as well. And, I really appreciate taking time during lunch hour on the East Coast and, 9 a.m. on the West Coast to listen in. I'm looking forward, Mike, to chat with you more about generative AI and maybe more deep technical implementations and aspects that a practitioner or product manager would find helpful when they're implementing Gen AI into their companies. So looking forward to it.
Yeah. So, you mentioned product management, and here at Great Data Minds, we really do fully endorse and embrace, and we're trying to get more and more of our customers to embrace the fact that analytics needs to be built. The data that we curate and put together to enable analytics, and the analytics that we put down on top of those data sets, really need to take a product mindset, right, to these data assets and these analytic assets, because they do have a life cycle and whatnot. Why is it, or how is it that a product management mindset would play into generative AI-oriented analytic products?
Yeah, that's a great question. And over the years, I've seen product management isn't understood the same way across different companies. Like for example, in today's audience, we have people from fintech, from government agencies, consultants, small and large company, academia, right? And it's important to kind of anchor on what it really means to be a product manager. So I would define a product manager as a bridge between the market, the users, and the product development teams, right? So a PM is the acronym commonly used for product manager. Also used for project manager, but let's park that for a second. So a PM's main role is to ensure that a product that is being built serves a real, desirable, and viable use case or a consumer need, right? It cannot be, it has to be viable because, we have to, it's a commercial, we work for commercial companies. It has to pay the bills. It has to be desirable. There has to be a market that exists for it, and obviously real, right? On the execution side, the PM's role is to be the glue between cross-functional teams and stakeholders that is so critical to bring a product to market, right? And be mindful of where we are driving human value, where we are driving business value, and just making a whole product successful. So I would say PM is in the kind of driver's seat there.
Yeah, gotcha.
Now, to your more specific question, right, in the world of AI and ML, a PM takes on a bit more of a challenge there because I would say AI products are more like probabilistic and not deterministic, right? So probabilistic means the responses of an AI system based on what is the most likely scenario it would happen, right? Whereas deterministic would be pulling data from a data warehouse. So AI product development lifecycle is long, iterative, ambiguous, and oftentimes its ROI is not clear. So while the underlying technologies and algorithms may or may not be well understood, but sometimes there's an expectation from management, for magic to happen. But a lot of times, many AI projects don't go into production and they end in a beautiful PowerPoint slide deck, right? So that's kind of where I would say product management is really critical for bringing Gen AI or any sort of AI solutions, into reality in a viable way.
Yeah, so I picked up a couple themes there as you were talking, Mukul. I heard design thinking elements coming into play there with the viable and sustainable, and also heard lean references. We're after the value. Where's the big pile of money in essence, right? And whatever form it takes. So, and the whole concept of a product manager, is just, that's a lean concept, right? It's about driving to the real needs of the actual constituents and the stakeholders. So I love that. So, but AI, I mean, I'm going to call it classic AI, machine learning driven algorithms that predict outcomes, the probabilistic kind of approach. That's been around for a bit now, yeah? So what is this Gen AI? What's different about this beast? Yeah.
Right. So I'm going to answer your question in the context of product management and how quickly the gold rush is happening. Right. So you're right. AI has been around since 1960s, and AI in general has been mature since the last 12 years, 10 years or so. Right. But let me give a couple of analogies. So remember when Apple and Google launched their SDKs for mobile app development?
Mm-hmm.
There was a rush to build mobile apps. And if you look back today, there was probably a $1 trillion app economy that was born, and or 9 million or so apps or mobile apps in the market today, right? That is the impact of a fundamental capability like a smartphone SDK or a platform, right?
Mm-hmm.
A second analogy I'd like to give before I answer your question is, remember when GPS was enabled in smartphones, in iPhones and Androids? After the GPS, we had Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, these kinds of location-based app economy companies were born in every part of the world. Mm-hmm. And then payment and authentication systems were introduced in smartphones. The gig economy was born that created about $500 billion worth of financial impact worldwide and jobs, right? So all that took many years, but this time it is different. So in November last year, generative AI had a disruptive moment with ChatGPT being launched, as we know. And compared to traditional AI applications, the fundamental difference was that ChatGPT was easy to understand intuitively by everyone. Like everyone immediately saw it and they're like, gee, I could use it for my job. I could use it for my use case, right? So, I would love to hear thoughts from, everyone attending the session through chat. Like what I see in every company today, there's a race to adopt generative AI. Everyone's piloting use cases, everyone's trying to have a generative AI strategy, but the scalable go-to-market strategy of Gen AI is still being figured out. Right, so there's less focus on data scientists trying to figure out how to use structured data and spend months cleaning it and getting it ready for an AI model or a machine learning model to use, right? Now we have APIs and endpoints where you can, boom, call, Gen AI API with a prompt and you get back a response. So the time to market is pretty fast.
Mm-hmm.
To kind of show the scale, I know this is going to be recorded. I'd like to share my screen to give everyone an appreciation of how fast the world is moving, right? So, there's a website that I play around with. It's called There's an AI for That. There's an AI for that, right? It's a catalog of AI use cases, right? And if you see, there's about like 6,300 AIs, available today. And this probably doesn't even include so many use cases from different, companies internally, right? But I'd like to, focus on one more thing, right? Let's go to the timeline, right, of this catalog, right? And there's a time slider here. Let's go back to January of this year. So in January, there were 135 new AI use cases or products launched, right? In February, about 100 or so. March, 248. April, 240. May, 236. You see, like, if you see the number of working days, we probably have like 10 AI products launched every day. Look at that. On 31st May, they were like about close to 10 AI products launched every day. So this gives a sense of why it is different this time. Like the true gold rush is happening. Now, will all of these products end up becoming unicorns or financially viable? Maybe not. But this basically kind of tells us why thinking in terms of a viable product mindset is so important. If I might ask, add one more difference, right? I mean, maybe people know the answer to that intuitively, but what's the difference between GPT 3.5 and ChatGPT? Right? Sometimes people use it interchangeably. One is a technology, other one is a product, right? So GPT 3.5 is a large language model. LLMs have been available commercially from OpenAI and Microsoft since 2019, right? GPT-3 has been available on OpenAI since 2020, and it's being used in AI research, in many companies. But it only when ChatGPT was launched, which is a powerful product, that's when the whole iPhone moment was created, as we were talking about earlier, right? And why is it so unique? Like going back to a question about lean product management, right? ChatGPT was fine-tuned to specific use cases. It had an intuitive user interface. It was human-centric. People understood it naturally. OpenAI made a ton of investment in the content safety and risk aspect of it to kind of keep all the bad stuff out of the responses. That was human-centric. OpenAI has an intuitive monetization model, right? You can pay $20 a month for premium access for GPT-4, or for GPT-5, you can pick different models. You can there's developer documentation, there's price per token, etc., right? And then that's being business-centric. And last but not the least, it has a partnership with Microsoft, which brings it a viable go-to-market path, right? Which may not exist for those 6,000 use cases we saw on the webpage I just screen shared. So that's kind of where I think that what's different this time is that generative AI has a much faster go-to-market ability than general traditional AI. And instead of like large teams of data scientists trying to build models, this time I think it's the ML engineers and full stack engineers that would need to build a whole product stack. And it'll need really talented product managers to fine-tune the use cases to bring it to market. So that's kind of how I would say I would differentiate generative AI and traditional AI.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, it sure is taken everybody by surprise and delight. I think my Google usage is down to by 95% because I hit ChatGPT all the time for my questions now. So thank you for that. That understanding and differentiation, and why is it so disruptive? I appreciate those insights. So and there's a lot of people trying to understand. There's a lot of concerns. There's a lot of what is it out there. There's probably, as we saw, there's 6,000 some odd potentially viable apps or products that have been created with it. Let's talk about some best practice. Let's get down to some details. Well, we can cover some of those other concerns and whatnot a little bit later, but talk to me a little bit about some of the what you believe are best practices wearing your product management mindset and some of the use cases that you're seeing for integrating this Gen AI into your business processes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think let's walk through, a hypothetical example of how to, go step by step in a structured product management mindset to realize a Gen AI use case. Now, before I go into the example, right, I'll say that Gen AI is being piloted pretty widely in all large companies. And, there are viable use cases across customer support, AI assistance, productivity tools, research applications, right? So the use case landscape seems to be pretty well understood to me. But let's say like you're a product manager working for a company and you need to bring Gen AI and you don't know where to start, right? My advice here would be to think of a narrow and specific use case that could improve the life of a human in a measurable way, right? So narrow specific use case that has strong value, human-centric value component, and it can be measurable, right? And when you're thinking of that use case, it's important to go through detailed product discovery process, as you would normally do in a product management world, with detailing out like a user journey in a step-by-step manner, right? So for those of you who may be familiar with design thinking or user journey mapping, like this is what I'm referring to. And if you're not familiar with them, I strongly recommend watching some videos and reading up about design thinking. So in user, when you're thinking about a very specific problem for a user, for a human, you map out their user journey step by step. You outline their pain points, the inefficiencies at every level, and what the bottlenecks are. And as you do that, opportunities for solving the problems would emerge naturally and more specifically, right? Now, we do this in general normal product management also, discovery and then delivery. With generative AI, it's the same two steps, discovery and delivery, but in a more, I would say, iterative way. Remember, like I talked earlier, the life cycle of Gen AI solutions is long, ambiguous, and iterative, right? So the example, let's talk about the example, right? So let's assume you're working for an e-commerce company, or a company that sells their products online, and you want to use generative AI for summarizing customer reviews. Okay. Let me talk about a use case in a very bad way first, right? So a bad way of defining a Gen AI use case would be, getting excited about the technology, right? Let's use ChatGPT to interpret all our customer reviews and enable every employee to ask it any question they want so that they can be productive in whatever job they're doing, right? So as you can see, this is a bad example because the problem is not clearly defined, the user is not clearly defined, the outcome is not defined, it's not measurable. So if you build a product for everyone, guess what? You build a product for no one, right? So now, a good example of defining a use case, and I'll be very specific here, is the following, right? We want a business analyst in the logistics department of our company to identify shipping quality problems reported by customers in the reviews based on electronic devices they buy under $200, and help renegotiation of SLAs with shipping vendors and reduce customer complaints, right? It's a long use case, but as you can tell, it is very specific. And I'll give you a few examples why. Firstly, in this example, it is easy to map out the pain points in the journey of the business analyst and prioritize them. So what does the business analyst do? They access data, they clean the data, they extract information, they interpret it, they prioritize, they reason and present it, right? So in all of those things, there will be some friction and pain points. The second reason why I think this is a well-defined use case is you can tell where generative AI solution is probably superior than a natural language processing solution, which has also existed for many years, right? So for example, like text extraction, reasoning, clustering of feedback, all those are commonly used, tools or techniques for mining large corpus of unstructured data. But generative AI makes it easy to do text extraction, reasoning, clustering better than NLP models that have to be fine-tuned over a long time, right? So those are opportunities where you know when to use NLP, when not to use NLP. Yeah, exactly, right? Now, the third thing is that if you're a practitioner or a product manager launching Gen AI in your company or a pilot, you got to think about a structured pilot with your stakeholders first, right? And it's important to set expectations that, hey, Gen AI is cool, but it doesn't do magic, right? Never promise magic. Instead, take a structured pilot program approach with making sure you have enough resource commitments from from the Gen AI team and the stakeholders team. You have data availability, you have risk assessment, user experience design, and you have the ability to run a whole bunch of experiments. Remember the iterative part of Gen AI product management? So that piece, right? And I would say the fourth thing is it's very important to measure the success and define goals, right? So in this example of a business analyst wanting to optimize the shipping quality, right? The goals would be a staff productivity metric, like how much time a business analyst is spending in extracting data and negotiating stuff, right? There is a human factor to it, the customer experience, the reviews from customers, right? You can tell if the reviews sentiment is going up or down, how many are good reviews, bad reviews, star rating. And lastly, the whole shipping company SLA compliance, right? Like how many errors are there? How many delays are there? So all of these become, intuitive goals that would help you calculate the return on investment on your Gen AI project, right? And last but not the least, right, in this structured approach I'm talking about, including your stakeholders' awareness, it's important to think about a framework for repeating this process multiple times over, right? Gen AI implementation is not cheap, right? The API costs and the number of tokens, it all adds up pretty quickly. So a good product manager needs to come up with reusable framework to scale from one use case to like 100 use cases over the next few years. So this framework and setting right expectations, it helps bring trust, build trust and awareness with your stakeholders, with your leadership, which is important to keep driving success.
Right. So yeah, definitely reinforcement on the design thinking approach when we're driving out the use case. I'm also hearing, we also believe in business or behavior-driven design approaches, which takes the given when then kind of rubric. It has always worked great for any kind of insight, analytic insights or even predictive machine learning based insights. And it feels like it directly is applicable for driving out Gen A oriented use cases. Right? So thank you for that. So there is a lot of discussion and concern around managing the risks of adapting and implementing generative AI projects. What should we be? Are these red herrings? How do we address these risks? How do we mitigate these risks or dispel the concerns?
Yeah, so great question. Risks. Assessing and addressing risks is one of an area that really differentiates generative AI to traditional AI, and I'll explain why. Right? PMs in general, don't over-index on risks when they're planning products early on, and even with like discriminative or regular general AI, right? Like usually it's an after post-launch go-to-market phase. Let me go back to a comment I made earlier. That AI products are probabilistic and not deterministic, right? Given that they are giving their best guess on the highest probability of being right. Now, the right answer of a Gen AI product is based on three kinds of input parameters that introduce what we call input risks. There are also output risks I'll talk about in a second, but let's talk about what the input risks are to a Gen AI system. The first risk is the choice of the model you're using, the foundational model and what data it has been trained on, right? So, I was talking about, GPT 3.5. Like OpenAI offers with GPT 3.5 4 different models. They have different parameters. They have been different parameter count. They have been trained on different sets of data, and their accuracy and speed are different. There's a trade-off between accuracy, speed, and let's say accuracy and cost, really. So you got to choose the right foundation model for your use case. and every model doesn't fit your purpose. So for example, if you're building a legal application for giving legal advice, you cannot and should not use any of the OpenAI foundation models. You need to have a model that is specifically trained on the corpus of legal data. And there's a emerging startup company called Harvey, which has a waiting list for months for legal companies to onboard and use them as legal assistants for their paralegals. So this is illustrating an example of, choosing model is one risk. The second is the input data risk. So the output of your Gen AI system is based on the quality of the data you give it as input. Like when you build prompts, you give it like some data to summarize, or even when you fine tune your model to your company's use case, you go through a fine tuning process where you have, a human or an AI involved process of giving like response, asking it questions and giving it the right answers for the model to train. That process isn't very clearly understood. So that could introduce bias and some other risks as well. So that's the second thing. The third risk is, I would say, input instruction risk. So Gen AI systems work on prompt engineering, right? And Gen AI is like LLMs are known to hallucinate. And when you give instruction to prompts, like help me do this, right? The prompts are prone to misengineering. They are prone to, security, problems. Like there's a risk called prompt injection attack, where people can, totally change the prompt the system is giving. So, managing the whole prompt and making sure it is, well structured, thought through, managing the risks is important, right? So just to summarize, the three risks are the choice of the model, the input data we're giving it, and the input instruction we're giving it, right? So like within these three areas of risks, it's really important to define your use case with examples. So, I talked about the logistics and shipping quality use case before. So it is really important to experiment with a lot of different prompts in there, like telling the large language model in this case that, hey, you are a business analyst and you are responsible for recommending shipping quality improvements, like giving it an identity, giving it a goal, and experimenting a lot with that. So that will kind of help mitigate some of these input data and instruction risks I talked about.
Great.
There are also output risks, right? So an AI system usually or should never just take the raw output of a large language model and show it to the user right away, right? There is usually a bunch of filters built in the technology stack after the fact. So for example, there are block lists, there are classifiers, there are sentiment checkers to make sure that we are blocking out certain words or tones, and we are using internal product classifications and data formats, right? All of those things also are subject to risks within a product stack. So a practitioner or a product manager, when they're building out the whole use case, they need to think about the input risks, the output risks, and at the minimum. And as kind of their product gets more mature, right? Products typically have a configuration layer, like what parameters they're using to control your system, the output formats, etc. They will need to be also tested and invested in to make sure your use cases, your product is stable. And last but not the least, explainability is so critical in any AI system, and specifically with Gen AI, because you have to, as a product manager, create documentation to explain to your stakeholders, how your prompt implementation works, how you handle these risks and system constraints, and just how to use the whole system, right? So these, boring details are so critical to bringing a successful product to market. I'll share my screen one more time to illustrate how important this is, right? So Meta launched its Llama 2 model last week. Let me share my screen. Okay. And it's one of the most powerful open source models, which is equivalent to its performance as OpenAI and Google's models, right? And they have this responsible use guide. I encourage everyone, and I have it open here, next tab. I encourage everyone to spend some time in reading this this guide. Like, it is 24 pages, and it has a lot of, easy to understand information on how you would implement, this kind of a large language model in your product stack. So this is a great resource that I'd like to everyone to kind of check out.
Yeah, definitely. And we'll send that link out to everybody as well. As you were discussing the mitigation of some of these risks and the things we need to do to kind of protect ourselves, and you kind of touched on data risks, but is there an undue concern around privacy data treatment or data privacy concerns that Gen AI brings to the table that doesn't already exist today? So,
data privacy, yeah, for sure. So there's two kinds of risks here, if I were to think about it, right? The first risk that was pretty widespread a few months ago was, hey, I'm giving my enterprise data to a private model like ChatGPT, which will use it to train itself, right? And I don't want my sensitive data to be showing up with someone else's prompt later on. That's just a no-no, right? So that was one kind of data privacy security risk, which has been addressed now because most of these private model companies like OpenAI and Microsoft have publicly said they're not going to train their models on public data, right? The other risk is more of a permissions risk. So let's say you work in the HR or finance team of a company. Typically, you would have access to a lot more sensitive data about like people's salaries and performance and the financial metrics in the upcoming quarter that other employees would not have access to. Now, if you use the same large language model or a product without the right permissions and privacy, data privacy and permissions control, that data could leak out and be made available to other employees. So that is a big risk that needs to be factored in when you build, a generative AI product within your company, right? Yeah. It's a great question because the tech stack is still evolving. Yeah. For Gen AI, like, there isn't a gold standard yet. So you need to think of what LLMs, what models you use, right? What is the trade-off between cost and accuracy, right? Then there's infrastructure cost, right? Like, you have to choose which infrastructure provider to build your stack on. How do you manage costs? Because guess what? Gen AI costs, when you keep giving prompts, the costs add up very quickly and you end up using your tokens, So how do you charge back that to your stakeholders if that's it's a problem in a mature organization? So, so that, and then, to your question about privacy earlier on, right? Like, LLMs in companies typically start with foundation models being fine-tuned with their own internal data, right? So fine-tuning is when you retrain a large model on a task-specific data set, right? And it requires a lot of intentional data preparation, labeling, etc. And then you have to build prompts, you have to engineer prompts, you have to implement governance rules around prompts, you have to make trade-offs with user experience, because if you put too much emphasis on security privacy, then there is a bit of a UX trade-off, which is probably more important for consumer applications. So all of those decisions, design decisions, have to be made if you're a practitioner or a product manager, right?
Okay. Yeah, and it sounds like many of those are not really any different than data warehousing initiatives or data science initiatives today? These are all many of the same without the prompt engineering, changes, but the treatment of data and security access controls and whatnot.
No, you're right, 100%.
Yeah.
So Gen AI is not a product by itself, right? Think of always as Gen AI or any AI system being a puzzle piece in a larger puzzle, a building block, right? So you're right, like the whole product stack of a business application will have all these security, privacy mechanism hopefully built into it. Gen AI brings in a kind of a less understood dimension to it. So therefore it's important to go back to like a first principles thinking to make sure you're checking all the boxes and define the success metrics of your product, whether it's customer experience, user experience, dollar value, et cetera.
Yep, got you. So how should the technical practitioners out there in the industry today that have been doing data and analytics on behalf of their organizations, how should they be thinking about the Gen AI technology stack and the integration of that stack into existing systems, especially maybe not necessarily especially, but including where these enterprises already have a data science platform, such as, like Data Robot or Data IQ. How does Gen AI start to integrate with those existing ecosystems?
Yeah, a good question. I would say it's somewhat similar to how a traditional AI system would be built in, but this time it has a layer of, prompt management in the middle, which wasn't the case before. So typically, mature AI applications are integrated through APIs with the rest of large business applications. So with Gen AI, also, practitioners need to think about the whole API, integration patterns, like which entity will call the API, how often they will call it, how will the data operations quality be measured, will there be sufficient logging, performance measurement, response times, error rates, like all those things will need to be thought through, defined in the integration phase of your project. I think the other thing I'd like to touch on is because we're talking about Gen AI and it is so iterative, you must plan for experimentation of different models and prompts within your product. It's very iterative. It takes many cycles to, get a stable application. And I'll say that one more time, plan for product analytics early on. In many companies, product analytics are a bit of an afterthought. Let's ship the software first, let's build the use case and we'll measure it later on, right? This introduces a pretty big risk in the world of Gen AI, right? You need to implement your metrics earlier on. You need to implement feedback mechanisms and reporting mechanisms from users, both qualitative, quantitative, and develop your KPIs that truly reflect the product value of your use case. Like going back to my example of business analysts, right? If it's not use case specific, then you will not really know if it's successful or not. And lastly, be as transparent as possible in your implementation. The last thing you want your consumers or stakeholders to think is that you're building a black box system they don't understand, right? Yeah. That is a very big no-no. There's plenty of good practices in the industry, but we talked about Llama 2 earlier. Facebook has been at the center of so many controversies that it has in terms of privacy and whatever, right? So it has taken a pretty good initiative to create this concept called system cards. You can look it up online. With system cards, you talk about explainability of every component of your decisioning stack in an easy to understand way. So I would encourage people to kind of look up system cards concept on Meta's website.
Okay, great. All right. So what are your favorite Gen AI apps? Give me a couple ideas.
Oh, there are so many. There's
I know.
6,300. All right. Okay. How about I do share my screen again, right? I read a lot of different news websites, and there's so many, news apps available. But there's an app that I use a lot. It's called Artifact. Let me see if I can share my screen of my phone and give a demo of that. And as we give the demo, we can talk about the app. Okay, do you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so here's an app called Artifact, and I have nothing to do with Artifact. They're not paying me money. It's a free app. Anyone can download it. So I'm illustrating, I'm sharing this app because it's a personalized news app, and it has some common product principles of any news app, right? So for example, if you see on top, there is a search button. There are different categories that you can you can choose during your onboarding process. And let's go to AI, okay? And then within here, it gives kind of personalized news articles, in that category. And then there is also like a for you, which is a general news feed kind of approach, right?
Mm-hmm.
So as you can see, so far, there is no Gen AI in this product so far, right? Although this app is differentiating itself from all hundreds of other news apps by saying we are Gen AI, but it's actually much of what you've seen so far is not Gen AI. Now, here's where the Gen AI comes in. When you go through news articles, there's so much to read, and there's ads and a whole bunch of stuff that, there's only so many news articles you can read. But if you kind of, let's go down and pick any, okay. Okay, let's pick any. Okay, let's go to Elon Musk. Okay, the first one, right? There is a top button here that summarizes the whole article in 3 bullets, right? So you don't even have to scroll and read all of it. I find this summary to be so cool, and it's really not available anywhere else, right? Like you have 3 bullets, you pretty much get the crux of what you want. Now, here's the configuration aspect that I was talking about earlier on. When you think of a product, that if you click on the 3 dots, it lets you choose what kind of prompt you want, right? So if you want it more dumbed down, choose explain it like I'm 5, and it gives you really literally 1 line, right? And you can choose a poem. Look at that, the same news article converted into. Now, this is kind of more on the entertainment side. But as you can see that this is kind of where, this one Gen AI feature leads to a more ongoing engagement from a consumer like me, right? And with this feature, it becomes easier to track success. Like, here's a cool thing, right? Like it has, you see this 1-day streak here, 2-day streak. They have gamified it because with the summaries, people come back and read a lot of news articles, and you can try to give 1-day, 2-day streak so people get encouraged. There's other stuff you can do. So you can measure success, like I said. So all of this demo to say that Gen AI doesn't make a product; it only differentiates and helps a product. It's a feature, not the whole product. So, while it is tempting to, put a lot of focus on, hey, my product is Gen AI, so it will be automatically successful. No, Gen AI is one and many features that will make a product successful. It will not do magic.
Awesome. Hey, we got a couple questions. Would you mind taking a shot at them? So one is, from an enterprise product management point of view, is the most promising integration of LLMs at the API service partner level?
Okay, that's a very specific use case. I think it really question. I mean, it depends a lot on what partners you're working with. So there are like hundreds of vendors offering Gen AI solutions right now for small and large companies to integrate in their stack.
Yep.
And selecting a vendor is one of the big decisions right now that an architecture team or product management team has to go through. It's so all over the place. So I would say looking at API integrations is important, but it's one of many things that needs to be taken into mind when you think of enterprise companies and how they build up their Gen AI stack.
Yeah, and in the analytics space, we recommend an ongoing longer range strategic portfolio of analytic capabilities that are linked to the enterprise strategies. Would you develop these long-term roadmaps for this space just like any other kind of analytic space, or is it different?
I would say I wouldn't call it a long-term roadmap. I would call it a kind of a vision of thinking of the art of the possible. I promise you, if you make a Gen AI roadmap today, it will be obsolete in a few days or a few weeks.
Yeah, because of the evolution of technology is insane right now.
Yeah, exactly. So for that reason, it's better to think about strategy and where Gen AI can bring transformational change in your company. So, for example, like if you are, if you're a company that differentiates itself on customer service, right? Go all in on Gen AI and customer service with like chatbots and personalized care, and all that stuff, right? If you're a company that differentiates itself in, creative fields or marketing, then go all in on Gen AI with, image creative, generation, on experimentation of new ideas and concepts, etc. Right? So pick where you want to invest in, where you'll get the most lift or differentiation for your industry.
Yeah. Okay. And using the open source models like Llama, does that make it easier for businesses to adopt versus you doing closed source alternatives?
I mean, there are many open source models. There are way more open source foundation models in the market right now than closed source. Closed source are like OpenAI and Azure, right? Amazon might have some. But it has become pretty clear to advanced practitioners that large enterprises and corporations need generic models, and they would want to fine tune or even retrain those models based on their company's data corpus. For example, if you're a bank, you will have tons and tons of proprietary financial analysis data that you would want your foundation model to learn, so that when it serves a customer need or a professional need, it maintains the brand, your values, the same constraints or even regulations and compliance that are so important to regulated financial companies. And if you're like I don't know, a marketing company or a legal company, then similarly you want to look at foundation models differently. It's okay to start with closed source commercial models to pilot your use cases, right? So to kind of very specifically answer your question, if you're just kind of wanting to test the waters to see how much lift you can get, it's okay to go to OpenAI or Azure or one of these providers, call their APIs. It's going to be closed source. It's going to have to maybe figure out, you have to rely on their support, etc. But once you have it, you may want to increase your investment and go into more open source models. But performance is very similar. Like open source models, performance has been fairly similar in most areas, but not all areas. Like hallucinations are different. Like even Llama, if you look up, Llama against other things, there's Llama doesn't understand, intuitive calculations so much, reasoning. So, I mean, there are some differences that you can look up online.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay. MIT reported that they're reporting about the carbon footprint that the cloud providers are demonstrating, and it's pretty significant. And I also saw an article on Harvard Business Review from Tom Davenport, where he's talking about, because of the compute power that these generative AI products are going to be needing, that is going to increase the carbon footprint even more. Is sustainability from a ecological standpoint being taken into consideration? How do we take that into consideration as we start to adopt this new capability?
Yeah, great question. So very large models like GPT 3.5 and all, they take months and insane amount of energy to train. And even for serving the inferences, so there's a training phase and there is a inferencing phase where you ask it questions. They both are very energy intensive, but it only applies if a model is very, very large and set up for general purpose use case.
Yeah.
Remember, one of the things I talked about earlier in input risks is a choice of the model. Now, the beauty of open source models is that when the Llama 1 version of the model leaked out a few months ago, the whole open source community jumped on it and they optimized the heck out of it, right? So there's some people who actually made a large language model run on a mobile device, right? Some made it run on a Raspberry Pi, that little $10, $15 thing you buy, right? You can run a large language model on your laptop, right? So the trade-off there is the model is not as large, it might be not as fast, and it may give you a good enough answer, right? But that is the design trade-offs you make when you're balancing value versus expense. So yes, will large language models have a pretty big energy footprint? Yes, they will, if they're very large. Yeah. But as the industry matures, there'll be more optimization that comes in. Just like I think cryptocurrency and the blockchains are a very good analogy there. Bitcoin and Ethereum, especially Ethereum, had a very, very high energy footprint, but now with the second and third generation of the blockchain technology that has been released, the energy consumption has been cut down by 99%.
Awesome. All right, I've got one more question. We got a couple minutes left. This one, this goes back to the product management role. Question is, how would I position myself as a product manager with a focus on AI for my future employers, right?
Well, step one, you are here, so that's good. That is a half joke, but I would say there's learn product management first. If you're a good product manager, you'll realize that AI and Gen AI specific product managing ML and AI products are kind of an add-on skill set, right? The main difference between an AI product manager and a general product manager is dealing with the very ambiguous problem space, which is, so an ML and AI product manager has to be really good with ambiguity, really good at defining out specific use cases, like we walked through, and they have to be okay with the whole iterative product development cycle and setting the right expectations of explaining how your system works and keep taking your stakeholders and customers along the journey. So those skill sets are more pronounced in AI product management.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I'll add on, if you go out to the Scaled Agile Framework website, they have a real good course on being a product manager and a product owner, which is the technical side, partnering with the product manager. I would also suggest studying up on design thinking and study up on behavioral driven design techniques for driving out use cases, because that flushes out many of the ambiguities that Mukul was sharing. My friend, that was an amazing dialogue on an incredibly fascinating topic. I so appreciate your expertise and thought leadership in this space.
Well, it was a pleasure chatting with you, Mike, and good participation from everyone else.
Yes.
I know that this is such a fast-changing world, and I'm surprised that there were no like hot questions that came up on the whole world of will AI steal my job kind of theme, right? I think that risk of community and all that, I think that warrants a whole 1 hour discussion separately. It's such a big topic, but
It is huge.
yeah, thank you.
We'll have to do a follow-up session for that one, for
Exactly.
sure. Thank you so much, Mukul. That was amazing. Like I gave you the compliment offline that people didn't hear, but it is you have a very eloquent way of making these like big topics seem very understandable. So I really appreciate that. And yeah, we'll need to do it. We'll need to do a second session, but just a follow up to the note that I put in the chat. I know a lot of you got our newsletter that said there was like a 2-step process to getting started with Gen AI. And the first one was to come to this session. So check that off the list. I've also added a link just before the thank yous came in, which is a great offer that we have for everybody online. It's a 90-minute educational programming and discovery session. This is getting some big brains all together to look at practical uses of Gen AI at your own company. And that is being offered free for the attendees of this call. So please take a click on that, and we'll send it as a follow-up as well. And just thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. To all the attendees, thank you for joining us. This has absolutely been an excellent discussion. We appreciate you, Mukul.
Thank you, Mukul. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks very much. Thanks,
Have a
everyone.
wonderful day.